My father was a soybean farmer in rural Kansas. He wore overalls, drove a beat-up truck, and never once mentioned anything about space, stars, or what was hiding in the barn at the back of the property. He died on a Tuesday, and the following Saturday I found out my entire life was a lie. Dad never talked much. He was the kind of man who said more with a nod than most people say in a paragraph. 40 years he worked that farm, 800 acres of soybeans and wheat in the flattest part of Kansas you've ever seen. Mom passed when I was 12, and it was just me and him after that. I helped with the farm through high school, then I left for college and never really came back. Not because I didn't love him. I just wanted something bigger than soybeans. I'd visit twice a year. He'd nod at me from the porch, we'd eat dinner in mostly silence, and I'd drive home feeling guilty for not coming more often. He never complained. He never asked me to stay. Looking back, I think he wanted me to have my own life because he knew his life was something he could never share. He died on a Tuesday morning, heart attack. The neighbor found him in the kitchen, coffee still warm on the counter. He was 71. I drove down for the funeral and stayed to sort out the estate. The farm was mine now. All 800 acres, the house, and whatever was in that barn I was never allowed to enter as a kid. The barn sat at the far back of the property, a quarter-mile from the house. It was bigger than any barn our neighbors had, and it was in perfect condition. That was the thing that always confused me growing up. Everything else on the farm was held together with baling wire and stubbornness, but that barn looked like it had been built yesterday. Fresh paint, solid roof, and a set of doors on the front end that were enormous, 20 feet tall, steel behind the wood facade. Dad told me it was for equipment storage, told me to stay out because of chemicals. As a kid, I believed him. As an adult, I just never thought to question it. The padlock on the door was heavy-duty, but the key was on Dad's keyring, which the neighbor had given me with his personal effects. I stood in front of those doors for a long time. Then I put the key in and turned it. The doors swung open smooth and silent, no creak, no rust, nothing like a farm building should sound. Inside was dark. I found a light switch on the wall and flipped it. Fluorescent lights buzzed to life across a ceiling 50 feet above me. And there it was. My brain didn't have a category for what I was looking at. It was a ship, not a boat, not a plane. A ship, sleek, angular, metallic, resting on landing struts that barely touched the concrete floor. It was maybe 60 feet long, dark gray with sections that looked like they could articulate and move. No propellers, no wings in any traditional sense, no markings I recognized. It looked like something from a movie, except it was real, and it was sitting in my dead father's barn in the middle of Kansas. The air inside the barn was different, cooler, cleaner. There was a faint hum coming from the ship, like it was idling, like it was waiting. I walked around it slowly, my boots echoing on concrete that was smoother than any floor I'd ever seen on a farm. This barn wasn't a barn, it was a hangar. There was a ramp on the underside. It lowered when I got close, like the ship knew I was there. Inside was a cockpit with 2 seats, instrument panels covered in symbols I didn't recognize, and a screen that lit up the moment I sat down. It displayed a map, not of Kansas, not of Earth. A map of stars, hundreds of systems, with routes drawn between them in thin blue lines. Some had markers, names in English written in my father's handwriting. First contact, Vel system. Trade negotiation, Andrew Reach. Medical supply run, Tessara. I scrolled through the log. There were thousands of entries spanning 40 years. Dad hadn't been farming, or rather he had been farming, but only when he wasn't crossing the galaxy. He'd mapped star systems. He'd met other species. He negotiated treaties and delivered supplies and explored worlds that humanity didn't even know existed. My quiet, nodding, soybean farming father had been living a double life that made every spy movie ever made look boring. I was still sitting there, scrolling through decades of my father's impossible second life, when I heard footsteps on the ramp behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Standing in the doorway of the cockpit was something that was definitely not human. About 4 feet tall, covered in short blue-gray fur, with large, dark eyes and hands that had too many fingers. It was wearing what looked like a utility vest covered in small tools. It looked at me, I looked at it. It smiled, at least its mouth moved in a way that suggested a smile, and said in perfectly clear English, "You must be the son, James, yes, your father said you would come eventually." I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. It walked past me and sat in the co-pilot's seat like it had done it 1,000 times. "My name is Kess. I have been your father's navigator and partner for 27 years. He made me promise 2 things. First, that I would wait for you. Second, that I would show you the ropes before you start your own exploration. It looked at me with those enormous dark eyes. Your father was the finest explorer I have ever known, and he said you were smarter than him. It gestured at the controls. Shall we begin? I sat in that cockpit for a long time after Kess finished talking. He told me about my father's first flight, terrified, gripping the controls so hard he bent the throttle. He told me about the alliance my dad helped build between 12 species who'd never spoken to each other. He told me about the time Dad flew through an asteroid field to deliver medicine to a dying colony, and how they named a mountain after him on a world I'd never heard of. My father, the soybean farmer, the quiet man who nodded instead of talked, he'd been a hero to civilizations I didn't know existed. I looked at the controls. I looked at Kess. I looked at the star map with its thousands of destinations, each one a place my father had been and I had never imagined. Then I reached out and put my hands on the throttle. I had a lot of catching up to do.